Hey there, this is Eric Keller for Bluepatone. I love using the undo history in combination with the Morph Brush and 3D layers in ZBrush. Using these tools together, you can create techniques that allow you unprecedented control over your details and your forms in your digital sculpts. So check out this video. I'm just going to show you a few techniques that I've used in a very basic form, but use these ideas as a jumping off point for creating your own workflows. Let's start with the traditional way of using morph targets in ZBrush. And I'll just use this crazy knight's helmet that I've been working on, kind of overly done, overly elaborate. And if you think this is too much of an exaggeration, here are my reference photos. These are pictures that I took at the Paris Museum. It shows you how insane some of these designs got. So I was kind of doing something along these lines with lots of cool medieval monsters. Anyways, and take a look at the subtool right here. This one. So traditionally, you'd want to store a morph target which stores the current state or position of all the vertices on the subtool in memory. And then you can use the morph brush, kind of like clean that up. So you go down to morph target, delete any existing morph targets, store a new morph target, and I'll go in here, I'll use like the Orbs Cracks brush really quickly just to make some like cracks and that kind of thing. All right, so I got some very sloppy damage done here, and now I can go in here and choose my morph brush, press M, here's the morph brush, and what I'm doing is I'm painting from that stored morph state back onto the surface, which allows me to kind of refine this detail. And this is great for cleaning up things. It's how I clean up the edges on some of my little monster designs here and these kinds of things. So it's very helpful. So that's the traditional way of using morph targets, and you can switch between the stored state and your morph state, and then you can delete morph targets and so on. A few versions ago, ZBrush changed the way that morphs work. So now that you can use the morph brush with your undo history. And it's a much more flexible way to go about doing things. So in this case, what I would do is I'm going to go back in my undo history to before I painted any brush strokes when the model is nice and clean. I'm going to delete morph targets so it's clear there are no morph targets on the surface. And I'm going to press Control and click on this state in the undo history. So now it's storing this state in history, kind of the same way that I did my morph target. So now if I go in here and I use the Orb Cracks brush or whatever, anything I do to this, paint little damage cracks, whatever, just like I was doing before, without storing a morph target, I can go to my morph brush and start cleaning it up just as if I had stored a morph target. So what's the big deal about this? Well, the cool thing is that since it's the undo history, it's like I can store multiple morph targets at any point in the undo history and use the morph brush to go from there. And you can also use this in combination with layers. So let's use a simpler object to make this more obvious how it works. Okay, so I'm going to switch over to Polysphere and let's subdivide it. Now the key to working this way is you got to remember that the point order has to be the same in order for this to work. If I Dynamesh or ZBrush or do something that alters the point order, then that's going to break this system. So and that's the same with morph targets. But the nice thing is we can use a timeline now as a way to store our morph targets. So we don't have to go to this button down here anymore. So I have a sphere that's about 1.57 million points. Here's my undo history. I'm going to press the Control key and click on here in the undo history. So that saved this sort of default blank slate in history. Now I'm going to go down in the tool palette to the surface palette, and let's just throw on some basic noise. Bring up noise scale, play with this a little bit, just get something really simple going. And I'll choose OK. And now I'll do Apply to Mesh. So since I have this stored in history, if I go to my morph brush now and start to paint on the surface, it's going to erase that noise because it's basically referencing this point in time in history. All right, that's pretty straightforward. I'm going to go into the surface menu and let's do some different noise. So I'll turn on noise, I'll go into edit, and maybe we want to do a different noise scale. Same noise, but different scale. And I'll choose OK. So now I have this, and I'll choose apply to mesh. So now what I can do is if I start painting on the surface, again, it's referencing this point in history, whereas when I had a blank surface, right? So that's pretty straightforward. Let's say I go back in time to before I added that smaller noise to this state right here. And I'm going to control click on this point in time. That changes where the undo history is stored, and I'll go forward, and now I can start to use the Morph Brush to paint in that level of noise. I'm erasing the small noise that I created and painting back in the larger scale noise. And I can go back and forth. I can go back to, I want to make sure that it's after I apply the noise to the surface. So this is when the noise is just a bump map. This is when it's actually applied to the surface. I'll store this state in history, go forward, and paint that stuff back in. All right, pretty cool. I don't like that. I want to go back to when it was a blank slate. All the way back here. Let's make sure this point count is the same. 1.57 million points. Store that state in history. Go back to the end. And now I can erase. So that's the flexibility of using the undo history as opposed to morph targets. I don't have to constantly delete and recreate new morph targets. I could just choose these different points in history. So let's take a look at how we could use this in combination with layers. And this can get quite complex if you wanted to. It takes a little bit of practice to understand what's going on, but there's a lot of flexibility. You can make it a very non-linear system for sculpting. So I'm going back to all the way to the point when it was a blank slate, and again, we were at 1.57 million points. I'm just going to go into the edit menu and just delete all the undo history. So no more undo history. We're just at a blank slate right here. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go into the layers palette, and I'm going to create a new layer. Note that when you create a layer, that's also part of the undo history. Let's name this so we can keep track of what's going on. So we'll call this base. So this is a nice blank slate right here. And now let's create another layer, and we'll call this one Noise 01. So we'll go down to the surface palette. You can do this with brush strokes, anything. I'm just using noise because it's a very quick way to get some detail on the surface. Choose noise, and we'll bring up the noise scale. Make a nice lumpy noise, something like this, some craters. Choose OK. So at the moment, it's not applied to the surface. It's just a bump map. So I'm going to turn noise back on and choose apply to mesh. And now that is baked into the surface. And it's also stored on this layer. So if I go in here and turn this layer off and hide it, we go back to the blank slate. So I'm going to use a combination of undo history and layers here. Let's turn this layer off and we'll create a new layer. And we'll call this one Noise 02. We'll go down here to surface, choose noise, edit, and this time I'm going to use noise plugin, and let's use something interesting like simplex marble. Okay, and let's edit the plugin scale. I'm going to set the mixed basic noise down to 0 so that we're only seeing the plugin, which is that marble texture. Let's bring up the strength a little bit, or a lot of it, just so we can see what's going on here. So we get a nice weird kind of psychedelic pattern. And we can play with the scale, do something like this is good. I'm going to choose OK. At the moment, this is a bump map. If I choose apply to mesh, now it's baked in to the surface, and it's also part of this layer right here. Turn it off. We get the blank slate. Turn this on. We see our craters. I turn them both on. We see the craters layered with the marble. And let's do one more noise layer just for good measure. So I'm going to turn these guys off just so we can see exactly what's going on. Let's name this. We'll call it Noise 3. And we'll go down to the surface menu again, and I'll choose noise. Let's go to edit, and let's go into noise plugin, edit, and choose completely different type of noise. We'll do like turbulent noise. Change the octaves, something like that's pretty cool. Then we can go in here, plug in scale. That's kind of neat. We'll do that. Choose OK and apply to mesh. So now we have 3 layers of noise. We turn them all off. We have our blank slate, this one, and this one. Fair enough. Now we want to do some edits to this. And again, we could do our edits with the Morph Brush on new layers. That way, when we're finished, we can use the layer controls to blend these together in any way that we want. So it's an awful lot of flexibility here. And that's the name of the game. So I'm going to create a new layer, and we're going to call this one Edit 01. Now this is in record mode. Let's turn record mode off. Let's hide this layer, hide this layer, hide this layer, and hide this layer. So you notice when we hide layers, that's storing the undo history state. So we don't necessarily have to scroll back and forth in the undo history. We can turn layers on and off and then use that as our save point. So now I have everything turned off except for base 1. So I'm going to control click right here. And now that's stored in history. Now I'm going to turn these layers on. And go down to edit 1, and I'll use my Morph Brush to paint from that stored state. Make sure that we have edit 1 is set to record mode. And now we can start to erase some of that noise on our weird little planet here. I'll just do a little region right here so that you get the idea. And of course, we can adjust the Z intensity and the size of our Morph Brush and so on. You can even apply all kinds of crazy settings to even get more interesting performance out of your Morph Brush. But I think this will work for now. So now let's go in here. We can turn this off. And I'll go down to, say, this right here. So I have noise 1 active. And I'm going to press Control and click on the undo history state. Turn these back on. Now I have this point stored in history, and I want to create a new layer for additional edits on top of this one. So I'll create a new layer, and I'll call this one Edit 02. It's in record mode, and now as I paint with my Morph Brush, I'm painting from that state in history when I had just this kind of surface noise on. So you can see I can go in here and really blend these things in a very precise way. I'm doing it really quickly right now, but if you actually spend some time on it, you can see the amount of flexibility you get. Let's turn this one off, and let's go back to, say, this state right here. Control click on the undo history to store that in history. Let me turn these back on. Create a new layer. In this, edit 03, and use our Morph Brush to start painting on this one. So we can start to follow these little details in the marble texture and bring those out if we wanted to. You get the idea. I don't have to go too crazy with it. Let's do one more example real quick just to reinforce the concepts here. So turn this off for record mode, turn these layers off, and I just want to get to my very basic, this layer right here with this kind of cool detail. Again, store a state in history, turn these back on. You could store a history state for any combination of these visibilities, by the way, even another layer of flexibility. So let's create new layer. We'll call this edit 4. I think I lost track of my layers here, but that's okay. Whoops, that's 34. And now I can go in here and start painting those details. And if you get tired of turning layers on and off, you could just go back in time at any point and just store a history state. Something like that. As long as you don't change the point count or do anything after you store the history state, go back all the way to the end here I could create a new layer, or I could just continue painting on this one, however you like. It's massive amounts of flexibility here. So there's no end to the amount of combinations you can do. And then, of course, since I have these all stored in layers, I can go in here and start to adjust their strength, or even put them in the negative. Really endless possibilities here. So let's take a look at a more practical example and go back to our Knight's helmet. Okay, so let's take a look at this subtool on the Knight's helmet again. And I've already set up some layers, so I'll just go through them and show you how they work. Let's turn on the solo button so we just focus on this. See little monsters on either side, aren't they cute? So I have my base layer, which is blank, no damage or any kind of noise yet. Then I have a corrosive noise. This is made with the surface noise, just a preset. And then I have another noise, some damage there, and third type of noise, and then some sculpted scratches, which I did really quickly. So let's turn this off, and I'm going to create a new layer, and we'll call this one Edit 1. What I'll do for this one is, rather than store the blank state in history, I'm going to turn on this layer right here. Again, this is stored in history when you turn a layer on. So I'm going to control click on this, store it in history, then turn it back off again. So I'm in this blank slate. And then I want to make sure that my edit layer is in record mode. So I'm going to be sculpting onto this layer. Since I have this stored in history, now when I paint with the Morph Brush, rather than erasing noise, I'm going to be adding noise. So it's just another way to go about doing it. Bring in the draw size here, and then I can just kind of paint this noise wherever I want to. And I can hold the Shift key and smooth it out so I can vary it, and so on. I'm just going to do a small area for now, so you get the idea. But it's definitely kind of fun, so it's a little bit hard to stop once you start it. I'll just create layers noise right here. And then let's create another layer. We'll call this one Edit 2. And I'm going to turn this noise off. I'll turn on my damage noise and control click right here to store this in history. Let's turn off this one as well. So we're just isolating this noise. You can do it however you like. I'm just trying to isolate each noise to make it obvious what's going on. So let's store that in history by control clicking up there, and then go back and then turn off damage noise, go to edit to layer, turn on record. And I want to turn on this one as well. When you turn layers on and off, you got to remember to hit that record button, otherwise you get a warning. But now I can dial this one in and blend these noises and this damage together. I just do a little area like this. Make this guy look even nastier. Let's work on Evil Rooster here as well, because he's kind of cool. Okay, you get the idea there. That's that level of noise. And we can go down here to the other damage noise. This one, let's turn this on, turn this off. Let's go down here and create another edit layer and turn both these on. Let's select this one, edit 03, put it in record. Let's actually first store this state in history. This one right here, store the state in history. You can turn on whatever layers you want to. Turn on edit 3 in record mode. Let's turn this one off actually. There we go. Okay, there we go. And again, our Morph Brush, we don't have to do anything in the Morph Brush. It's just automatically storing this undo state in history. But now I can go in here and paint this noise on. And I'm using noise again just because it's fast to apply, but you could do this with any type of detail, sculpted detail, whatever you want. You can even hold the Alt key and see what happens when you do that. Get some different cool details in there, and so on. All right. And then finally, let's add some scratches. So I'm going to turn these guys off. I'm just going to work on the same edit layer though. I'll turn on scratches, store this in history, and turn it off. Turn this one on, turn record. And now I can start to add some of these scratches in here, select more selectively. So, I mean, this can speed things up because when I add my scratch layer, I can go fast and furious and just go crazy adding scratches where I want to, and then use the Morph Brush to kind of be more selective as to where I want them. So, like here, for example, be a good place to add some scratches. And like I said, anytime you turn layers on or off, it's stored in history. So I can turn these layers on and store this state in history, and then go and create a new layer. And I think I've made it pretty obvious all the different stuff that you can do with this. So maybe I want to bring down the Z intensity so it's not quite so strong. And then I go in here and just start playing around. So lots of possibilities there. You can use this technique in like infinite different combinations. So if you have some ideas on how you like to use the Morph Brush with undo history, leave a note in the comments. Let me know what kind of techniques you've created for this sort of nonlinear workflow. Let everybody else know too, because it's really incredibly flexible. And there you go. Fun stuff, kind of a nonlinear workflow using layers, undo history, and the Morph Brush. And also surface noise. Okay, so there you have it. Some interesting ways to use undo history, 3D layers, and Morph Brush. But of course, this is only the beginning. I didn't even get into using the undo history brush. I'm going to save that for another video. But it's really amazing what you could do with undo history. There's so many different techniques that are all tied with this one concept. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you got some ideas in your own workflows, leave a note in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.